Hello and welcome to Take Me Home, the podcast offering a social democratic alternative for the politically homeless. My name is Sebastian.moore.
And I'm Hilary.salt.
And today we're going to be talking about...
I want to talk about PSPOs, Public Space Protection Orders.
Okay, I'm going to find out what that is in a minute.
Yeah, just because my head is in local government space because of the council campaign.
Mm-hmm. Coming into the final days now, aren't we?
Absolutely, 1 week away. Oh.
And I'm going to be talking about citizens' assemblies.
Great.
And do you have a positive or negative impression as we start this about citizens' assemblies?
Quite negative, really.
Okay.
People have their finger on the scale, is my view.
Okay, well, we'll get to it. Let's start off with PSPOs, though.
Shall we say, first of all, Happy International Workers' Day?
Today.
1st of May. It's 1st of May today,
isn't it?
Yeah.
I was looking at a map today of all of the places that celebrate Labour Day.
Right, okay.
In some form or another.
Yeah.
So I suppose our bank holiday on Mondays reflecting that.
Yeah.
And I think in the map of Europe, and every single country has a day off at some point, except for Bulgaria, which it's like optional, and then the Netherlands just ignores it completely.
Okay.
And people were joking because there's this idea about the Netherlands, you know, that Protestant work ethic, and the sort of the golden age of the Netherlands, that they're renowned for working hard. And people were sort of taking the mick out of them a little bit. Okay,
it's not really taken off in the UK. I don't think International Workers' Day has it. I know last week there was a commemoration, I guess, of Workers' Memorial Day, which is when you pay tribute to all the people who died working.
Okay,
in the workplace. There's fewer of those than there used to be, but people do still die in their workplace. Bank holidays was the other thing that it kind of sprang a thought about in my head. Would you support switching 1st of May bank holiday for St George's Day bank holiday? In England, presumably only.
Yeah, I guess so.
Or adding to it. We have fewer bank holidays than most countries. Could have another one, I guess.
I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about bank holidays. But yeah, St George's Day would be quite cool. I don't know, we had this conversation with Pete Ramsey on St George's Day last year for our special episode, which we referenced last week, and go back and watch it because it's great. But we talked about this idea of how to, is it something that the governments can sort of incentivise people to celebrate? I do think that the British people, if they get a day off for something, and in this case the English people, they will have any excuse to celebrate. They'll enjoy that.
Absolutely.
A bit like for the Queen's Jubilee. I'm not sure it was just monarchists out in the street having street parties. So yeah, why not? I like the fact that, and maybe you have England and the four nations have separate bank holidays. You know, Scotland has a bank holiday on the 2nd of January. Don't they? So they have New Year's Day and then another on 2nd of January, which I always think is...
And the North of Ireland has St Patrick's Day as well. So feels like there's a precedent been set there.
So why not?
Can we do a poll on the...
we can actually. We can do it on YouTube. We can do a YouTube poll.
Okay.
Do you want me to do that?
Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Let's see what people think.
Let's do it.
Anyway, sorry. PSPOs.
You've got to remind me about that as well at the end, because that'll completely slip my mind.
Okay. PSPOs.
PSPOs.
So there's a report that's been launched a couple of weeks ago by the Campaign for Freedom in Public Spaces, or some words similar to that. Just looking at these PSPOs and how kind of undemocratic they are. And I thought it was quite an interesting topic to discuss because I thought you and I might disagree, which will be interesting, and B, I think it is one of those things that certainly within the SDP we talk about a lot. There's I'm in a little chat group, and I always laugh because almost every week somebody comes up with a new ban.
Right.
Not that those become policy, but just in a chat.
But it can be tempting, can't it, when you're out and about in your daily life and you see something you dislike, to say, oh, we should just ban that.
Absolutely.
If we got into government, like loud music on public transport or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's been one of them. Yeah. So just because there is that instinct, and I kind of feel a bit uncomfortable with that, I thought it was something that it was worth talking about. So PSPOs are something that can be implemented at council level. They're implemented by council officers. They don't go to full council. So there's no kind of democratic control over them. They're often accompanied by quite significant fines if people breach the requirement. Come on to what some of the bans are.
What does it stand for again?
Public Spaces Protection Orders.
Okay.
So it's meant to stop antisocial behaviour. And I think, if you're talking about really serious antisocial behaviour, I think there's perhaps a space for them. But the way that they've grown and the way that they're being used, I think, is becoming quite problematic. So some of the things that have been banned by councils are, I think probably the one of the most frequent is dog fouling. I think that one's okay. Don't have a
just
problem
explain
with
to me what that means though. Like how's that used? So is it
So-
a protection order for a specific space in the
Yes.
public?
So
it's not on a person. I assumed
No.
it was like an ASBO,
No, it's not like an ASBO. No, it's about you can't do that here. So you have restricted areas, and in the restricted areas you can't do certain things. Making sure that when people who have a dog, then the dog fouls the public space, you have to pick it up. That, to me, I don't really have a big problem with that. I was up in Clitheroe the other week, and one of theirs was you cannot take your dog in a public space without having on you the means to pick up poo. So, I don't know if this has ever been done, but somebody could search you and say you don't have poo bags on you, and therefore you're breaching the PSPO. That kind of feels a bit over the top to me. I'm
just a bit confused because I would have thought that most places in public you can't just let your dog poo and not pick it up. So does that mean that there are PSPOs for all of these places, like parks and roads? And
so I think you've got straight to the nub of the issue there. So I think with all these things, it's entirely reasonable, entirely correct that there should be an expectation that you would not let that happen. But then the question is, is the only way that we can persuade a public to adhere to those kind of social norms by saying if you don't do it, we'll ban it, we'll fine you. There's a ban, and if you don't do it, we'll fine you. Because to me, that almost undermines the public duty that you have to do the right thing. So you said you're not allowed to let your dog foul. Well, there's lots of places where you are allowed, where there isn't a PSPO and...
where?
Well, if you think about if you go into the country, there'd be no PSPO there. I would still pick poo up in those circumstances, but there will be places where there isn't any ban, isn't any restriction, but you still expect people to do it. And I think that if we want to carry on that track, what's the real problem with this whole expansion of these, is because it kind of removes the social glue that means that you would do those things anyway. As soon as you start saying, oh, you can't do that because there's a ban, you're almost no longer doing it because it's the right thing to do. And to me, that the more you do that, the more you kind of say, well, there isn't a ban on doing this, so I'll do it. Rather than say, what's a sensible way to behave, to get along with everybody, and to have a kind of a positive atmosphere in a public space. And I think you should let people come to their own conclusions on that, rather than having a massive list of things you can't do. In that report, there was like a sign from one of some public place, and there must have been probably like 6x4, so 24 different things that are banned, and so they will be things like begging, sleeping. Can't sleep on a bench. Don't know whether that's something that should be banned necessarily. Playing loud music, which again, you might say, well, if somebody's pumping out Kanye West, that might be quite annoying. But we did a street stall, didn't we, the other week? And there was a guy, a busker, who came and did a few very, I thought, nice background tunes that were... I thought they made our day a bit more pleasant.
Yes. he was giving it his all.
He was, yeah.
No, it's good fun.
Yeah. And as soon as you say you can't amplify sound, you don't just stop buskers. You stop people who might want to be making a speech about how they don't like what the council's doing, or... a speech about protecting our Jewish communities or anything like that, So you you cut down more and more what's possible in the public space. And I'm not sure that's very helpful. Because some of those things I think are a social good. I think it's good that, somebody can set up and give us a few tunes in the shopping centre. I think it's good that, if somebody feels that there is a political issue that's really important, they can stand up and say something about it.
Yeah, for sure.
There's also loads of perhaps what you might call bizarre bans that some councils have introduced. So a ban on picking blackberries. I feel that's a bit over the top. Why shouldn't you pick blackberries? And I actually quite like the idea of foraging and making the best use of the fruits that nature produces for us.
We're not too far from the Fallowfield Loop, which is a place where a lot of people pick blackberries.
Yeah.
An old railway line that they've turned into a footpath and a cycleway.
Yeah.
And I quite like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Some coastal areas have banned throwing stones in the sea.
Good bit of skimming.
A good bit of skimming.
Oh, there's nothing like trying to search out the perfect stone, and you find it and you think, this is it, this is my chance, and the pressure that goes with it. You can't waste the good skimming stone.
Exactly. I do remember one of my boys, when we were paddling, I was paddling with one of the boys, and one of the other ones was on the beach, and he decided to skim a stone, and it skimmed and it hit me right in the middle of my forehead. I had a Harry Potter scar.
Oh, wow.
Which was, when you cut your head, there's loads of blood.
Yeah.
So,
Maybe you needed a PSPO.
Well, I don't think so. I think if people are doing it in a way that's annoying, you just tell them to stop, don't you?
Yeah, and I think that one of the problems is that there's this misconception nowadays that anything that is not appropriate, not morally acceptable, should be legislated for.
Yeah.
And I think that is the biggest thing that we have to, the biggest myth we have to bust. Because when people say, oh, so you like people playing loud music on trains? No. Mm-hmm. But I don't need the government to tell them not to.
Exactly.
Particularly as often. And this is one of the big pros for, I would say, our side of the argument, which is arguing for the community response, is that you will, no matter how big the state gets and how many people and police officers and ways of enforcing it they have, you will never be able to have a good enough a response as good as the community response.
Correct.
And I used the example, I think a while back, of my church where somebody came in during a service and was really disruptive. And immediately a load of guys get up from the pews, and they're all, old boys, like 60s, in their 60s, 70s. And they go and just sort of say, you're going to be leaving now. And I thought, if we'd called the police, it would have taken ages and it would just completely disrupted the service. But instead, they were able to deal with the problem.
Yeah. And I think less and less people feel more and more people feel unable to deal with problems because they do want to call the police or call the transport police or something like that. And I think we've got a duty to actually deal with it ourselves.
Exactly. And I think people feel concerned that if they do get involved and try to deal with the situation, they're going to be the ones that are potentially penalised. There was an incident recently, I can't remember which supermarket it was, but a retail worker that stopped somebody from shoplifting and the police arrested him.
Yeah. Was it Waitrose? I think it was one of the high-end ones.
Yeah, I didn't want to throw him under the bus because I don't remember exactly.
All right, okay.
I don't remember exactly which one, so I wouldn't want to slander them.
Okay. So that's interesting because I thought you might be a bit more pro bans than I would be. Because sometimes you say I'm too libertarian.
No, I've not said that, have I? I feel like I'm a libertarian at heart.
Yeah.
Certainly on these issues of, of, let's say, like civil liberties.
Yeah.
And things like sleeping.
Yeah.
I just think so often these bans are a sign that the government is unable to really deal with the problem. So they impose a top-down solution of, there's a problem of homelessness. Okay, we'll ban sleeping on park benches.
Yeah.
And I think of times where I remember once in Italy when I was teaching, and you have these really long lunches in schools in Italy, which I love. And it was a gloriously hot day and I was so tired. And I went to the park and slept on the bench and woke up just in time for my lesson and then wandered back to the school. Yeah. They want to ban that.
Yeah, that would be banned in certainly some council areas in the UK now. Swearing was one I just wanted to mention because I hate people swearing. I think there's a space for swearing. There's an appropriate time for it. But when people are effing and jeffing in the on the shopping street or in the park, and I am the person who says, "Would you mind not swearing?" And people. I just think that distinction between ordinary language and swearing is getting tighter and tighter, isn't it? People just don't seem to always draw a distinction. I want to reinvent that distinction, make it a bit more clear.
I think that's touching on a really important point, actually, with regards to the philosophy of language, because people would say, but swearing, it's just words, like who cares? And I think people on your side of the issue understand it's just words. And the point is, if you normalise the F word, you'd need another taboo word.
Yeah.
Because it's the idea is the distinction. When you find the distinction, you're being accurate with your language and using it in a way that is I don't know what you'd call that, like of the social, morally acceptable in the social realm. And that's important to find that right language.
Yeah.
And you're right, the lines have become blurred. So just, it's like the thing of go to the shop in your dressing gown.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, of course, a dressing gown in some ways is like a toga, right, that they would have worn 2,000 years ago. That's not the point of the specific item. It's the fact that we're not making an effort and we're not, we're blurring those lines.
Yeah. So again, swearing I wouldn't ban, but I do think you should pick up people if they're behaving inappropriately and ask them not to. How do you feel about people saying, "Oh God," "Oh Jesus," those kind of things?
I mean, I often do.
Do you? I still wince. When I was a kid, certainly my grandparents would never have used the word God or damn or even bloody. They wouldn't have used any of those kind of words at all. And I still wince a bit especially if I hear kids say, "Oh my God."
Right. I
kind of think, you really shouldn't use God's name like that. And I'm not a Christian, but I still think that that's a bit inappropriate. Gosh, I'm turning into certainly my mother. Anyway, sorry. So PSPOs, I bringing it to a bit of a conclusion, I guess. I think there really needs to be some consideration of their use. There needs to be some limitations on their use. So some things that I think are really problematic with them is quite often councils employ private companies to impose the fines. which seems completely wrong. I think one of the Liberal Democrat MPs actually proposed a change to the law that would say you can't use these to kind of generate profit. But the Labour Party's opposed that amendment. I think the law is relatively clear that you should only use these if it's a kind of serious problem, but nobody's enforcing that. And, you know, so there's been this real deluge of them. And I think we need to get it under control. I kind of feel a freedom of information request coming onto my council just to find out exactly how many PSPOs they have and how they work.
And that they're implemented by council officers.
Yes.
Which are staff employed by the council, not elected councillors.
And no way for the community to appeal to say we don't want that.
Well, that's going to change when you're in council.
Indeed, yes. I will be looking at that, certainly.
Very good.
Good. So, shall we move on?
Let's do it.
To citizen assemblies. Citizens assembly. Okay.
Apostrophe following the S.
Okay. Yeah, of course.
Because it's the assembly of or for the citizens, plural.
To be fair, if it was apostrophe S and it was just I was the citizen in charge,
that'd be fine.
That would be absolutely fine.
Yeah, one citizens assembly.
Yeah.
I went to a meeting this week that I think you told me about.
Yeah.
And it was organised by a group who are advocating for a citizens' assembly in Manchester, Greater Manchester. And it was an interesting event because I got to know a little bit about what they're proposing to do, what they're supporting, the reasons why they want to implement a citizens' assembly. But I also have some issues with it. And citizens' assemblies, which I'll get onto in a sec, what they are, but they cut across... they follow the dividing lines of our modern politics, which I could sort of tell you whether you're for or against based on whether you're on the new left or the new right. And a lot of the time we in the SDP, because we're sort of straddling those two groups, we often find ourselves talking to people on the quote-unquote new right, and they'd be massively against citizens' assemblies. So I thought it would be an interesting one to bring to the table. So a citizens' assembly... effectively, it comes from, or you can trace its history back to ancient Athens. So Athens is really where we get our, democratic or our democracy, the idea of democracy from, around sort of the 400 BC mark. And they used sortition as a way of implementing laws. And they basically took, and it was only men, of course, but it was adult male citizens. And so you had, I think, people called metics who were potentially from other city-states that were residing in Athens. They weren't allowed to partake, but it was the adult male citizens. And a random selection of those adult male citizens would make up the legislative body. And citizens' assemblies are a way of choosing a random selection of people across, let's say we had one we're in Old Moat currently where I'm running for council. Imagine we had one just for this area. You'd take the electoral roll for Old Moat, you'd randomise it and you'd find maybe 100 people and they would make the laws for this area, right? Now, I think for some people that seems strange because we feel that our vote is the thing that gives us power. So we whilst we're definitely Democrats, and I think most people are Democrats in this country or support the idea of democracy, we assume that, or we link that to the idea of our vote, and that comes from things like the suffragette movement, advocating for the importance of a vote. So when we think of an idea that isn't directly linked to our vote, it feels very disempowering somehow. It is weird because I think that when I think of a citizens' assembly of selecting a section of the population and it's randomised, so you should get an equal representation. It feels like I haven't got the power anymore because it's these people that are deciding it.
Yeah, I think the equivalent is juries, isn't it?
Yes.
And we've talked about when we talked about jury trials, I made the point that it's not just about the trial, it's about the jury being the one kind of element of the current democratic framework where you expect ordinary citizens to play a part directly.
Yeah, exactly. So I was going to say we already have sortition for a different area of our state. Now, there are different arguments for why we need it and how it would be run. I'll try and give you a broader perspective, but obviously there'll be people out there that say, no, we need sortition and citizen assemblies for this. We don't, we need it for something else. The idea is that it's a deliberative body. So rather than at the moment, with our first past the post system, you're supposed to have two sort of visions of this is what we're going to implement if we become elected. The citizens, you take a poll of the citizens, and whichever one wins out, that is the vision that gets enacted. Obviously, there are reasons why people would say that's undemocratic. Keir Starmer and his government were elected on a fifth of the electorate, a third of those that voted at the last general election, and they have a massive landslide in government, House of Commons. So the idea with the citizens' assemblies is that you get all these people in a room, you have experts who come in and provide the evidence for different sides of the argument, and the assembly is faced with a question, and after weeks, potentially months of deliberating, they will come forward with a proposal. Now, it's been used quite famously in Ireland for the abortion question. So how it was implemented in Ireland was that the lower house, the Dáil, just like our House of Commons, voted to enact a citizens' assembly. So they implemented one for 4 topics, but the first of which was the 8th Amendment. So the 8th Amendment in the Republic of Ireland was effectively it was giving the same rights to a woman as to the unborn child that she might be carrying. And the Citizen Assembly looked at that question and gave proposals to the government. Now, there were 3 votes that were carried. First one was that the amendment should not be retained in full. So that was the first thing that the Citizens' Assembly said. And that was 79 votes to 12. So there were 100 people in the Citizens' Assembly, but various ones dropped out, then they redraft, get new people in.
Right, okay. Yep.
The second vote was that it should be replaced or amended rather than deleted and not replaced. So instead of just getting rid of the amendment, they were saying, no, it should be replaced or amended.
Okay.
And that was 50 to 39, so a bit more balanced. And the third was that it should allow, and I'm not going to pronounce this word, but effectively the Parliament, it's the 2 houses.
Dáil?
No, the Oireachtas or something. You got the Dáil and the Senate,
yes.
but together they're this
okay.
word that I don't know how to pronounce. It should allow that body, the Parliament, to legislate rather than making provisions within the Constitution itself.
Okay.
It's really interesting. Right? Here you get into sort of constitutional democracy and thinking about how we should enact a constitution, vote on a constitution. And that was regarding the termination of pregnancy, any rights of the unborn, any rights of the pregnant woman, etc. So those are the 3 things that they went back to Parliament with. And those were all enacted by the lower house, by the Parliament. They also took 13 votes on various circumstances relating to abortion, which might have no abortion completely banned, or up to 12 weeks it's okay, or up to 22 weeks, or at any point.
Okay.
Right? And they looked at all these 13 things and they all voted on them. And they're really interesting. So for example, if there's real and substantial physical risk to the life of the woman, only 1 person voted that abortion should be completely banned for that. 8 people voted for 12 weeks, 12 people voted 22 weeks, and 62 voted to say there shouldn't be any limit. You should be able to have an abortion up to term. And it changes with the various circumstances. So this Citizens' Assembly, they were consulted or advised by 17 organisations, some of which were pro-life, some were pro-choice, some were unbiased, impartial. And they were given this question, and the attempt was to give a balanced view of it, and then for these 100 people to basically do the work of the country in coming up with a consensus opinion. Okay, so
Yep. Okay, got it. Yep.
Now, I think all of that sounds fairly good. It's like, okay, great. I understand the idea that citizens' assemblies can be useful for really difficult issues where you need to have some answer, but you're finding it hard to have a breakthrough. I also think that there is an argument to say that our current House of Lords could be replaced by a citizens' assembly. So effectively a House of Lords, but chosen through sortition rather than appointed by political actors.
It's smaller than it is now, possibly.
Yeah, that's the proposal by the Sortition Foundation, working with, I think, 858 projects. They want to reduce it to 300 people chosen by sortition rather than currently what it is, which is life peers and people from the bishops.
No life peers anymore. They've gone, haven't they?
Life peers you have, not hereditary peers.
Ah, sorry.
Life peers are chosen for life. And I think that was a really sad day, actually, this week.
Yeah.
People that have been in the House of Lords for a long time and their family going back for hundreds and hundreds of years. And regardless of where you come down on that issue, I think it's a classic example of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and you're getting rid of something good for the sake of thinking that it's the right thing. And I'm not saying that I'm in favour of hereditary peers. I'm not, but they had a stake in the legislative body that wasn't purely for. It wasn't. I wouldn't say it was self-interest in the way that a lot of these politically appointed peers are, and I think that's a real concern. And I think if you get rid of something, particularly something that old, you've got to have a really solid plan and a great proposal to replace it. And I don't think they do.
I think it was done in a very shoddy way as well.
So this could be a potential proposal for that. And I'm open to that idea. Now, the Sortition Foundation, which are financially backing the Greater Manchester Citizens Assembly campaign, which I went to the meeting for. Okay. They've got a video explaining this idea for replacing the House of Lords with a Citizens Assembly. I have some issues with it, though, because I think it's ideological in the sense that they're making pleas for, all these lords that don't know what they're doing. We need plumbers in there. We need bakers. We need, and I think it's appealing to one side of the political spectrum, typically the left.
Yeah.
And this is what I noticed in that meeting, that they were making assumptions that people on the right just wouldn't agree with.
I mean, it's interesting that plumbers and bakers tend to be self-employed, and they tend to be actually more right-wing than people who are public service workers, for example, interestingly. You always pick bakers now, don't you?
Because the BFAWU.
Yeah, I think you feel you've got a real stake in the whole baking profession.
The BFAWU without being a baker? It's the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union.
Correct. Yes, I think you probably could. I think we could make a request on your behalf. Certainly.
I wonder if anyone has ever become has taken on a role just so that they can justify their belonging to a union.
I think they have, certainly, if they have ambitions to be a general secretary.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
That could be my life goal. So they were a couple of things. They said, when they choose the citizens' assemblies, when they sort of people, and they will pick them randomly and then go to their houses, knock on their door, so that the idea of that is that you're not favouring people that are likely to be responsive to emails or whatever, letters in the post.
Yeah.
But you actually speak to somebody in person and can explain it, which sounds great. They said, and this is often the case for Citizens Assembly, I was going to say gender, but I'm worried about using that word with you. Gender, race, ethnicity, are all taken into account. I think age might be taken into account to get a fair representation. Now, I'm of the opinion that I don't think just because somebody is 30 years old, as I am, that they're going to have a better idea of what is good for me and therefore the country as somebody that's 70 or 80.
Agreed.
I don't think that person of one ethnicity is going to speak for all of that ethnicity.
Yeah.
And people might say, well, you need to make sure you have a fair representation across the board. Absolutely. Make it random.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
the point.
Randomness would do exactly that, wouldn't it?
And you might end up with more of one ethnicity.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I suppose one of the things is I think you might have said at one point you take the electoral roll. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people not on the electoral roll.
Yes.
And you'd want them to be included, wouldn't you? So I guess where do you get the list of all the people from?
No, but I don't think I would. I'm happy to do it off the electoral roll.
Are you?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So those people who have decided not that, for example, that there's nobody I can vote for, so I won't be on the electoral roll.
But like an awful lot of people are on the electoral roll that have decided there's no one they can vote for. You know, the majority in my constituency at the last election were on the electoral roll. So a majority of people were on the electoral roll but didn't vote.
But I would say that of the people who are not on the electoral roll, they might well have views and characteristics that are different to people on it.
Yeah, so join the electoral roll.
Okay.
There has to be I think there has to be a point. You can't be too idealistic about these things. There has to be a moment where you say it's up to you to participate.
Okay.
And we'll try and make that as fair as possible. But otherwise, you're then trying to find even more ways of reaching people. And I think you then run into the risk of, as making a case for being libertarian at the first half of this, that you have to have some sort of database and you have to track these things. And I think if people don't want to be found and they don't want to be on the electoral roll, then so be it.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Another thing is that a lot of this depends on the question that is being set.
Yes.
So, for example, somebody at the event the other day, and most, I got the impression that were sort of on the green left. Mm-hmm. They were talking a lot about climate change, and a lot of people, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, advocate for citizens' assemblies because I would argue, I think that their impression is that if we had citizens' assemblies, they would get the things they want.
Yeah.
And that's a big issue. You can't be advocating this just because you think it's going to get the answers that you're happy with. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the people there the other night suggested that one of the questions might be, how do we tackle the climate crisis? And I explained to her that there are a lot of people for whom that question would be absurd because they don't think there is a climate crisis. And you can scoff at that. You know, people can say, that's ridiculous, it's obvious because the science is there. But that's a political question. It has to be a political question. And so I think they're taking into account, or they're making a lot of assumptions for things that are political questions. And that's the real issue. We're not in a space right now where we can all agree on what the question should be, on how they choose who's there in the Citizens' Assembly. I mean, they suggested the other night, it's not just for citizens. They said it will be for anybody that's living here. And I thought, whoa, no, not at all right.
No, agreed.
You have to be a political subject of this country.
Yeah.
I couldn't, go and live in Italy for a few weeks and then have a say on the laws of that country. I don't think that would be right.
I agree.
So we have to have these conversations and have to be of the same, agree on the premise before something like this can get off the ground. And maybe in the sort of chicken and egg scenario, maybe that is through doing it, that you actually answer some of these questions. But my worry at the moment is that it is just appealing to people that are on one side of politics. And there are other people, we go to a group where particularly I can imagine mentioning it to that room and they would go, no, not at all.
I agree, yeah. I think there's three things that to me make me very nervous and cynical around citizens' assemblies. One is the question you ask. We've just mentioned that having the way in which you ask the question can be very leading or can direct the way in which the discussion will happen. So the question, I think, can be very much be biased in many ways. The second is which experts you ask. And I mean, it's okay saying, well, the Citizens' Assembly need to be clear that they should be in control of the experts that they ask. But if these are people who know nothing about a topic, how do they know who the right experts to ask are? And I really worry that the people framing the questions and framing the evidence will invite the experts that they want and won't invite the experts that they don't want. So, you talked about abortion in Ireland, didn't you? And I think in some ways it's kind of obvious who the sides are in that, and you can invite them in. But if you think about something like 15-minute cities, for example, I could probably give you a list of all the people who would support that. But if you asked me for a list of people who were against it, I think it'd be I'd find it more difficult to know who those people were. So I do think it would be the expertise that you put before the panel could be very much fixed.
Yeah.
And the third thing I think is I don't know what you call them, the facilitator, the person who allows everybody to exchange views. I think that person could also be very much guiding and controlling of the situation. I think that was the case in the Ireland abortion discussion, for example.
So in the Ireland one, to my knowledge, it was one of the 100 people that were chosen for the Citizens' Assembly was the chair. And I don't know if there was an officiator sort of above the chair.
Facilitator, I think. Yeah.
I think you made a good point about the 15-minute cities as, you take an issue, and this is the thing that it's like you can't just bring an issue up and say, oh, there's clearly these people are for it and these people are against it, because most people might not have heard of it and might end up being against it. So you take something that's a scheme that someone's dreamt up in one of these think tanks, 15-minute cities, and you don't necessarily know who's against it because that hasn't materialised yet. An example might be Brexit. In the years, you think of the early noughties, if they'd done a Citizens' Assembly for Brexit, what would the question have been? It wouldn't have been, should we stay or should we go, to quote The Clash. It would have been something about our relationship with the EU and about the technicalities, and you wouldn't have realised that there is a massive grassroots, or you can call it grassroots, just a lot of sort of everyday people that are against us even being in the EU in the first place.
Yeah.
And that became apparent as we got further and closer to the referendum.
Yeah. And what do you do in a Citizens' Assembly if you get to the 50-50 or 51-49 or 52-48 territories?
I don't know, but here's where I think it all hangs. An issue like abortion, imagine we've got the spectrum from conception, I couldn't think of the word there, conception to birth.
Yeah.
Right? And you say, where is abortion acceptable? And obviously it's a really complicated issue with different circumstances, but just on a broad sense, if we picture it, people will be dotted around here. Some people over here, quite a few people over here, and some people in the middle. The idea of Citizens' Assembly is not to replicate those opinions within a smaller body. It's to see if by deliberating and by being faced with a lot of evidence and having to really really get your head around a lot of these issues, whether you can actually bring people into a compromise. And so I think the metric with which a Citizens' Assembly could be deemed successful or not is whether you've grouped people around an issue. And I think that'd be really interesting. And I don't think it would be, from here to here, I don't think it would be just in the middle. I think actually a lot of the time when you get a group of people into the room together and their job is to really understand each other and to come up with a solution, I actually think you can get some ideas that weren't previously thought of.
Is there not a danger, though, that what you end up with is something that's actually quite banal? I don't know if did you talk about the Dunfermline example at your meeting? So they have tested this in Dunfermline, I believe. And I confess I didn't read it with any great level of detail. But I did have a very quick look at what came out of that Dunfermline example. And it did feel that what came out of it was things that were quite, they weren't earth-shattering. And I worry that, if you do end up, you will end up with a kind of almost lowest common denominator that actually everybody thinks that, I can sign up to that, but nobody's happy.
I think that's possible. And I think our efforts within politics have to be in the other direction, have to be opposed to the lowest common denominator version of politics, right?
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's what we have at the moment with the culture wars.
That's
and everybody
true, yeah.
Sort of politicising everything but not engaging in the political. And what we have to do is find ways of getting the highest common denominator. And we believe in them. That's why we're doing it, right? Yeah. We believe that there are examples of things you can do which actually everybody will be happy with. And that's the art of politics. And whether that's done, in town hall meetings, in citizens' assemblies, in election campaigns, however it's done, that's what we're trying to do, and that's what we should carry on doing.
I guess the one thing I think is quite interesting about citizens' assemblies is that I wonder if they could work on very, very local levels. I mean, I just don't think they'd work for Greater Manchester, but I think, if you... One of the things we often have discussions about in the park, on the park committee, is we've got these carved animals, and whenever there's a question as to, we've got enough money in the kitty to afford a new one, what should we have? And it's not a massively contentious issue, but people do get quite interested and engaged in it. And I kind of feel inviting 100 people from Sale in to say, what animal do you want? That would be quite an interesting discussion.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think we often look at things like citizens' assemblies as if this is the full idea and we can be for or against that. But it could be completely different depending on how it's used. And I think as a very local thing, and as something that scrutinises the decisions of those that... Because I'm not in favour of sortition for doing politics all over the place, because I do think there's merit in dedicating your life to it and learning about all of the issues. And I don't think that's for everybody. I think some people are more inclined that way.
Yeah.
But as a scrutinising mechanism, I think it could be really useful, particularly for things like the council where, everyday people are busy with their lives. They don't have time to watch council meetings and to scrutinise them. So a body that does that, I think, would be really interesting. This is the advert, which I'll put a link to. This is the campaign for the Greater Manchester Citizens Assembly.
Okay.
And I think they're sort of low on detail, but their argument is that's for all of us to decide on the detail of it. The only thing they've said is that they want a permanent and powerful citizens' assembly in Greater Manchester.
Okay.
I think already I'm like, whoa, wait a second. What do you mean by that?
Yeah.
But their next event is at the People's History Museum on 20th of June. In Manchester City Centre. People's History Museum is great as well. So it gives you a chance to go and look around if anyone's interested.
Love the banners.
Right. So I'll leave a link in the description for that if anyone wants to go.
Great. And let us know what you think. Be interested to know if there's a feeling that these could be part of a political future or not.
And go and answer our poll about St George's Day being a bank holiday on YouTube.
Great. Definitely. Thanks for watching. Please do recommend us to your friends, and we will see you again next week.